It was a rainy afternoon when I first saw her, the kind of rain that wasn't a downpour, but a slow, steady drizzle that seemed to wash the world in silver. The streets glistened, reflecting the blurred shapes of passing umbrellas and glowing street lamps. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and fresh paper, the scent drifting out from the old library that stood at the corner of the street. I had been walking toward that library, my collar turned up against the chill, when I saw her. She stood under the narrow shelter outside the library doors, as if the world beyond it wasn't quite ready for her. Her hair clung in loose, damp strands to her cheeks, the rest falling in waves down her shoulders. Raindrops traced delicate paths down the edges of her book, an old, well-worn novel she held close to her chest, as if it was something precious. Something that had walked with her through countless storms. Her gaze wasn't on the people hurrying past or even on the book she clutched. She was looking at the rain, not merely watching it, but listening to it like every drop carried a story, meant only for her. There was a quiet stillness in her posture, the kind of stillness you notice in someone who has learned to find peace in moments when the rest of the world rushes by. I stopped walking without realizing it. She didn't notice me, of course. Why would she? I was just another stranger in the gray blur of the city, standing a few feet away, pretending to look at the sky, while stealing glances in her direction. But something in the way she tilted her head, the faint, almost absent-minded curve of her lips, it felt like watching someone listen to a song I couldn't hear. I wanted to say something, anything, maybe comment on the weather, maybe ask her what she was reading, but the words stayed caught somewhere between my chest and my throat, tangled in the strange awareness that whatever I said might feel too small for this moment. So I just stood there, watching her. The rain softened, turning into a mist that curled around the edges of the shelter. People came and went, shaking off umbrellas, tucking books under their coats, but she stayed exactly where she was, as if she wasn't waiting for the rain to stop, but rather for it to tell her its last secret before it faded away. A gust of wind carried the faint rustle of turning pages from inside the library. She finally looked down at her book and brushed a damp strand of hair from her face. The movement was so unremarkable and yet so utterly human that I felt something shift in me, like a quiet realization settling into place. She wasn't beautiful in the loud, dazzling way that demands attention. She was beautiful in a way that you could miss entirely if you weren't paying attention, like a single line in a poem that stays with you long after you've read it. The drizzle slowed to a few lazy drops. She glanced up at the sky, and in that moment, our eyes met. It wasn't long, maybe just a second, maybe less, but it was enough. Her gaze was calm, unhurried, as if she'd known I'd been watching her all along and didn't mind. There was no surprise in her expression, only a faint, knowing softness, like she was quietly acknowledging something we both didn't have words for yet. Then she turned, stepping into the library without a sound, the door closing gently behind her. I stood there for a while, staring at the spot where she'd been, the world around me slowly resuming its rhythm. I didn't know her name, or what story she carried with her, but in that single glance, she had become the most unforgettable part of an ordinary, rainy afternoon, and I knew I would be back tomorrow. Fate has a strange sense of humor, or maybe it was just coincidence, the kind that feels a little too precise to be accidental. Whatever it was, I found myself seeing her again more than once. The first time after that rainy afternoon was at the small coffee shop down the street from the library. I was halfway through my order when I noticed her in the corner, a cup of tea steaming in front of her, and that same old book resting on the table. She sat with one hand curled around the mug, the other tracing absent patterns on the page without turning it. The world seemed to hum around her, the low chatter of customers, the hiss of the espresso machine, the faint smell of roasted beans, but she seemed untouched by it all, wrapped in her own quiet world. I thought about saying something, about walking over and making some kind of casual comment, but the moment stretched and slipped away. By the time I got my coffee, she was standing to leave. She glanced in my direction, her eyes lingering for just a moment, and then she smiled, small, polite, and gone before I could even return it properly. I told myself it was nothing. People see each other in the city all the time. And then, 2 days later, I saw her again, this time at the bus stop. The wind was colder, carrying the scent of rain from somewhere far off. She stood a few feet away, her scarf pulled close around her neck, a paper bag from the corner store cradled in her arm. She wasn't reading this time, just watching the traffic slide past. When she caught me looking, that same polite smile appeared. Not wide, not inviting, just enough to acknowledge the moment before she looked away. The bus came, people shuffled on, and somehow, we ended up standing near each other. I could hear the faint creak of the bus's joints, the hum of its engine, and the rhythm of her breathing. I thought maybe I could say something simple, ask about the weather, or if she came to the library often, but the words never made it past the thought. She stepped off 2 stops later, the sound of her boots fading on the wet pavement. It kept happening. Once at the corner store, where I was buying milk, and she was choosing between 2 jars of jam. She looked up as I passed the aisle, and for the first time, her smile seemed warmer, not quite familiar, but not distant either. Like she recognized me, even if she didn't know my name. These small encounters should have meant nothing, but they didn't feel like nothing. They stayed with me in the quiet moments before sleep, in the spaces between work and errands. I found myself replaying the curve of her smile, the way her gaze lingered for a fraction longer than necessary, the unspoken weight in those brief exchanges. Maybe it was the rarity of such moments that made them feel important. Or maybe it was just me, reading too much into the universe's little coincidences. Still, each time I saw her, it felt like a thread was being pulled tighter between us, one I couldn't see but could feel all the same. It wasn't much, these fleeting glimpses, but they were enough to make me wonder what her voice sounded like, or what stories she might tell if I ever found the courage to ask. Enough to keep her in my thoughts long after she'd walked away, disappearing into the folds of the city like a secret I wasn't ready to lose. And somewhere deep down, I had the unsettling feeling that these meetings weren't going to stop. It was just past sunset when I saw her again. The sky was painted in deep shades of gold and violet, the air holding that quiet stillness that comes right before night settles in. I had been walking through the park without any real destination, just letting my thoughts wander when I noticed her. She was sitting alone on a weathered wooden bench beneath a tall lamppost, the glow of the light spilling gently over her. In her hands was a book, open halfway, her fingers resting lightly against the pages as though she were holding not just paper, but something fragile. The park around her was almost empty, save for the faint rustle of leaves and the sound of distant laughter from a playground. For a long moment, I simply stood there, watching her in that quiet pocket of the world. But something in me shifted, a small, stubborn courage that whispered now or never. I walked over, my heart pounding louder than my footsteps. "Is it a good book?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of surprise there, but it wasn't unkind. After a brief pause, the corner of her mouth lifted in that gentle smile I'd seen so many times before. "It's different," she said. Her voice was exactly what I had imagined, low and warm, like the last note of a song that lingers in the air. I smiled back, feeling something loosen in my chest. Different can be good. And just like that, we began talking. At first it was about books, her favorite authors, the kind of stories that stayed with her long after she closed the last page. She told me she liked novels that didn't give you all the answers, the kind that left you with questions to carry around for days. I admitted I often read to escape, to disappear into someone else's world for a while. From books, the conversation shifted. We spoke about places we'd never been but wanted to see, the cobbled streets of old European towns, the quiet charm of small coastal villages, the kind of places where time seemed to move slower. We spoke about little dreams, too, like learning to bake bread from scratch, or planting a garden, or waking up early just to watch the sunrise from a rooftop. Her words were unhurried, carefully chosen, but they carried a depth that made me want to lean closer. It wasn't just what she said, but how she said it, like she meant every syllable, like each thought had weight. Somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing the chill in the air. I stopped noticing the passers-by or the street lamps flickering on one by one. The rest of the park had faded. There was only her voice, her laughter soft and genuine, and the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she loved. I don't know how long we sat there, but by the time I realized the hour, the night had deepened, and the park was nearly empty. She glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should probably go," she said, closing her book and slipping it into her bag. I nodded, though a part of me wanted to keep her there, to find just one more question that would keep the conversation going. As she stood, she looked at me again, her expression softer than before. "It was nice talking to you," she said. "You too," I replied, meaning every word. I watched her walk away, her figure fading into the shadows of the park path. And I knew without any doubt that I wanted to hear her talk again, not just once more, but for as long as she would let me. After that evening in the park, something shifted. Our meetings were no longer just chance encounters, they began to feel intentional, as if the city itself had stepped aside to make space for us. We didn't set exact times or places, but somehow, we always found each other. Sometimes it was outside the library, other times at the little coffee shop where she liked her tea without sugar and I preferred my coffee far too sweet for her liking. "You're drinking dessert," she would tease, shaking her head with mock disapproval as I took a sip. I'd defend myself half-heartedly, telling her life was too short to drink bitter coffee, and she'd roll her eyes but smile anyway. We started walking together more and more, through quiet streets lined with trees that swayed gently in the wind, through bustling markets, where the air smelled of roasted nuts and fresh bread, through the park where fallen leaves crunched under our shoes. Sometimes we talked endlessly, filling the air with stories and questions. Other times, we didn't speak at all, and the silence between us felt as comfortable as a worn-in sweater. She told me about her favorite childhood book, the one she'd read so many times its spine had cracked and its pages were falling out. I told her about the old record player I had inherited from my grandfather, and how I still listened to music the old-fashioned way. That led to our first playful argument about music. "You really listen to that?" she said one afternoon, her tone teasing as she scrolled through my playlist. "What's wrong with my taste?" I asked, pretending to be offended. She gave me a look somewhere between disbelief and amusement. "Half of these songs sound like they were recorded in a basement during a thunderstorm." I laughed. "That's the charm. It's raw, it's real." She shook her head, but there was a sparkle in her eyes. "One day, I'm going to make you listen to something decent, and you're going to thank me." I told her I'd believe it when I heard it, and she nudged my shoulder in mock annoyance. It was small moments like that, her teasing, her laughter, that made my chest feel lighter. With each step we took side by side, I learned something new about her, like how she had a habit of tilting her head slightly when she was curious, or how she would tap her fingers against her coffee cup when she was thinking. She noticed things about me too, how I sometimes hummed without realizing it, or how I always slowed my pace when we crossed busy streets, just in case. Our walks became the best part of my days. No matter how tiring or dull the hours before, I knew there might be an evening where I'd find her waiting by the lamppost or leaning against the library wall, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. We were just two people learning each other's worlds, trading little pieces of ourselves with every conversation, every shared coffee, every quiet step. But somewhere between the laughter and the silences, something deeper began to grow. I didn't say anything about it, not yet, but I felt it. Every time her shoulder brushed mine, every time her smile lingered a moment longer than it needed to, every time her voice softened when she said my name. I didn't know where this road would lead us, but I knew one thing for certain: walking beside her felt like exactly where I was meant to be. It happened on a Thursday. The sky had been gray since morning, heavy with the promise of rain. By late afternoon, the clouds finally broke, and the city was washed in a steady drizzle. The sound of it was everywhere, soft on the rooftops, tapping against windows, whispering through the leaves of the park. I found her waiting outside the coffee shop, a familiar sight now. She stood under the small awning, holding an umbrella, but not opening it yet, as if she was still deciding whether she wanted to face the rain or just watch it. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot, a few strands framing her face, catching the lamplight in a way that made me forget for a moment that I was standing in the middle of the sidewalk. When she saw me, her smile widened, not just polite this time, but warm, the kind that carried a quiet welcome. "Forgot your umbrella?" she asked, glancing at my empty hands. "Yeah," I admitted. "Guess I was hoping you'd save me." She laughed softly and stepped closer, lifting her umbrella. "Come on." We started walking, the rain drumming gently above us. The umbrella was just big enough to cover us both if we stayed close, so close that I could feel the warmth of her shoulder brushing against mine with every step. It was a small thing, barely anything at all, but it sent ripples through me that I couldn't control. The streets glistened under the yellow glow of street lights, reflections of passing cars stretching like streaks of gold across the wet pavement. I could smell the faint sweetness of her shampoo mixed with the cool, damp air. Every so often, our arms would bump, and I'd feel a jolt, small, ridiculous, and completely impossible to ignore. We talked in that easy way we'd fallen into over the weeks. About the rain, about the book she was reading, about how the city seemed quieter when the weather turned like this. But beneath the words was something else, an undercurrent I couldn't name. My hands stayed buried in my pockets, my fingers curling tightly. I wanted to reach for her hand, God. I wanted it more than I wanted anything in that moment. Just to feel her fingers slip into mine, to know if the warmth I felt when she was near was something she felt too. But the thought of it froze me. What if she didn't want that? What if she pulled away? The air between us suddenly awkward and heavy? I'd rather keep this closeness, this comfort, than risk losing it with a single mistake. So I kept my hands where they were, pretending I wasn't aching for her touch. She tilted her head to look at me as we passed under a flickering streetlight. You're quiet, she said softly. I shrugged, forcing a smile. Just thinking. About what? I hesitated, then said, about how the rain makes the city feel different. She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. Yeah, like it slows everything down. We walked the rest of the way in a comfortable silence, the kind where words weren't necessary. I let myself memorize the moment, the rhythm of our steps, the soft patter of rain overhead, the nearness of her that felt like both a comfort and a temptation. When we finally reached her street, she turned to me, her eyes catching the lamplight. Thanks for walking with me, she said. I wanted to tell her I'd walk with her anywhere, through any weather, but all I managed was, anytime. She smiled again before stepping inside, leaving me standing in the rain, wondering how much longer I could keep my hands in my pockets. It was one of those evenings when the air felt soft, the rain from earlier leaving the streets fresh and glistening. The city was alive, but not hurried, shop lights glowing in warm yellows, the faint hum of traffic, and the rhythmic sound of our footsteps as we walked side by side. We had been talking about nothing in particular, how she liked her coffee a little too strong, how I still couldn't understand her obsession with rainy weather, how we both wanted to travel but never seemed to have the time. It was easy, effortless, the way it always was with her. Up ahead, the crosswalk light blinked red, and we slowed to a stop at the corner. I could feel the warmth radiating from her in the cool night air, could hear the faint rustle of her coat. When she shifted her weight, the light changed, and we stepped forward together. Halfway across the street, it happened. Her hand found mine, not hesitantly, not grazing by accident, but deliberately. Her fingers slipped between mine like they had always been meant to be there, like she had been holding back, just as I had all this time. The contact was immediate and warm, her grip gentle yet certain, as though she was telling me without words, I'm here. I've been here. I don't know if I stopped walking for a fraction of a second or if the world simply slowed around me. The sound of the city seemed to fade, the rush of cars, the chatter of strangers, even the thud of my own footsteps. All I could feel was her hand in mine, the steady pulse of her fingers curling around mine as if to anchor me. In that moment, I looked at her, unsure if I should say anything. But she wasn't looking at me. She was gazing ahead, a small content smile on her lips, as though this was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it was. Maybe we had been building toward this without even realizing it. My heart was beating faster than it should have been for such a simple thing. But it didn't feel simple. It felt like a quiet shift, a before and after moment. The kind you don't see coming until you're standing right in it. We reached the other side of the street, but neither of us let go. We just kept walking, our hands still joined, our steps falling into the same rhythm. I could feel the faint brush of her thumb against my skin, a small absent-minded motion that sent warmth rushing through me. Is this okay? I asked quietly, not wanting to break the moment but needing to be sure. She glanced at me then, her eyes soft in the glow of the street lamps. It's more than okay, she said, and her voice calm, steady, held a truth that went deeper than the words themselves. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. The silence between us had always been comfortable, but tonight, it was something more charged, intimate, full of unspoken things we were both beginning to understand. The city moved on around us, people passing by, headlights sweeping across the wet pavement, laughter spilling from a cafe, but it all felt distant, muted. Because in that moment, it wasn't about where we were walking or what we were saying. It was about the quiet certainty of her hand in mine, and the way it felt like I had been waiting for this without even knowing it. By the time we reached her street, the air was cooler, the night deeper. She didn't let go until we stopped in front of her building. She gave my hand a final squeeze before slipping inside, leaving me standing there with my heart still racing. And as I walked home, I knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. Since that day, holding her hand became my favorite habit. It didn't matter where we were, walking through a crowded market, sitting on a nearly empty bus, standing in line at the coffee shop, my hand would find hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. And she never pulled away. In the beginning, I thought I would be too aware of it, that I'd constantly think about the warmth of her palm, the way our fingers fit together. But after a while, it became as natural as breathing. Sometimes I wouldn't even notice until I realized how easily my thumb traced slow circles over her skin, or how her grip would tighten just slightly when the sidewalk grew busy. I loved the way her hand felt in mine, soft, warm, steady. But it wasn't just about touch. It was about what it meant. In the crowd, her hand in mine felt like an anchor. The noise, the motion, the chaos, it all faded when I had that connection. In the quiet, it was a reassurance, a way of saying, I'm here without needing words. I remember one afternoon when we were crossing the park, sunlight streaming through the branches overhead. She was telling me about a dream she had the night before, something strange and funny, and her hand squeezed mine mid-sentence, just because. We didn't need to say anything about it. The gesture spoke for itself. And then there were the rainy days. Those were my favorite. We'd share the same umbrella, walking so close that our shoulders brushed. The rain would patter softly above us, and her hand would be there, warm against the cool air, solid against the shifting world. I think I fell in love with her a little more each time I felt her fingers tighten around mine as we stepped over puddles or crossed slick streets. It wasn't just romance, though it was that too. It was comfort, trust, a silent promise that went deeper than anything we'd spoken aloud. Holding her hand felt like holding her heart, like she had placed something fragile and precious in my care and trusted me not to let it slip away. There were moments when I caught myself wondering if she understood what it meant to me, that each time our hands met, it felt like a small vow. Maybe she did. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with that soft, knowing smile, the one that made my chest ache in the best way. One evening, we were sitting on a bench by the waterfront, watching the last streaks of orange fade into the night. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of the sea. She shifted closer, her hand slipping into mine without a word. I turned to look at her, but she was staring straight ahead, her hair moving gently in the breeze. I didn't need to see her face to know she was smiling. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about holding on in the easy moments, the walks in the sun, the quiet evenings in the park. It was about holding on in the storms, in the unknown, in the days when the world wouldn't be as kind. And I knew, deep down, that we would. No matter what came, no matter how the seasons changed, I would keep her hand in mine. Not because I was afraid to lose her, but because holding on felt like the most honest thing I'd ever done. That first touch had changed everything. And every touch since had been a reminder of the silent promise we had made without even speaking the words. I'm here, you're here, we'll stay.